They attack our greatest strength and exploit our greatest weakness. This is the title of this brief video. For those of you who's first time visiting this page, I'm Franklin Jones, the author of The Black People's Matrix. I post information for those of our people who are tired of believing in things that insults their own intelligence. Those who are seeking to gain a clear, concise, and accurate understanding of our plight and condition, because they know that an accurate understanding of our condition and plight is necessary in order to develop the proper kind of strategies to liberate ourselves. Because as long as our understanding of our plight is flawed, all remedies that stem from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. And now back to this title. The title is They Attack Our Strengths and They Exploit Our Weaknesses. In response to the 1960s unprecedented unified black protests, white social scientists were hired to study the African American culture. Their task was to find our greatest strength and to attack it unrelentingly, to find our most exploitable weakness and greatly exploit it. Upon studying the African American culture, white social scientists determined that the greatest strength of the African American culture was black unity. This black unity was fueling all the unprecedented unified black protests, naturally. And they determined that our greatest weakness was the fact that we were stripped of our true identity and culture during the enslavement of our ancestors. So now they attack our black unity unrelentingly through propaganda campaign that keeps us believing that we are our own worst enemies. This is why we always hear my black on black crime, black on black crime. We're hearing it as being exaggerated, overpropagated, and saturated through media into our minds. Because what it does is erodes our unity. It erodes our unity and it shifts our collective aggressions away from the white society and redirect against ourselves. This is why we're constantly being here a black on black crime. And that's why you have many black people are now insisting that it's we who are our own worst enemies. That was deliberately done by design, through propaganda campaigns. That's how they attack our unity. The next thing they determined, the fact that we were stripped of our true identity and culture, it means that we're more susceptible to social engineering. So through their control over our media, they started creating caricatures of us and they started putting it inside the media. And we started adopting those characters. We became those derogatory media depictions of ourselves that we accepted as being our reality. People that have been stripped of the true identity and culture are more susceptible to this. It's a true social science called media social engineering. This is why social scientists says those who controls the people's media images are able to steer their culture. We've seen this a lot. If you watch a movie and you see a black woman doing that head turning thing, before long, when black women are arguing, you see a black woman doing the head turning thing, not recognizing that the media is not imitating the black woman. It's the black woman not imitating the media. Most all people think that the media reflects our reality, but it's more often we imitate how we see ourselves in the media. I give you another example. Let's say there's an Italian family that lives in Australia. They've lived in Australia for the last 2 generations. That Italian family moves to America and he starts watching American TV and he sees how Italians are portrayed in the movies. They will start imitating how Italians are portrayed in the movies. So this is our culture, but they're imitating the caricatures of how the Italian play. They will start dressing like mobs and saying things, forget about it. You start imitating how they see their group being portrayed in the media, okay? The white society weaponized that fact against black people. They start creating a caricature of us. And through creating this caricature of us, they've eroded our unity and they've made our culture somewhat dysfunctional by negatively steering it. They conditioned us from calling ourselves brothers and sisters during the 1960s, which has a more unifying effect. Words have power over the subconscious mind. We function based on what we call ourselves. So we were calling ourselves brothers and sisters. In the 60s, we were more unified. Through their media social engineering, they have our characters called ourselves niggas and bitches, which is more dividing. Okay, words affect how we function. This is why men who call themselves thugs are more likely to engage in a fight than to avoid one. This is why women who call themselves bitches often become stubborn and reasonable. Okay, it's a psychological phenomenon the social science have thoroughly studied. Also, by conditioning us to call ourselves niggers, rather than this divides us from our unifying African identity. So now that we're calling ourselves niggers, and in fact, many of us prefer niggers over being called an African. Once the people have been stripped from their unifying identity and cultural identity, they're able to be made into anything you want them to be. So they've now steer our culture. So this is why we are calling each other niggas and bitches. Why are we a glamourifying pimp? Who glamourifies a pimp? Think about it. You know, calling women hoes. Our culture is being negatively steered. It's a part of the soft war. The white society attack our unity and negatively steer our culture to create a sort of a dysfunction that hinders our ability to come together against them, as witnessed during the 1960s. This was their response to the 1960s unprecedented unified black protests. It's also called ideological subversion. Ideological subversion is when the oppressors uses disinformation and misinformation at a targeted population to manipulate them to think and behave in ways that are against your own interests. We think and behave in ways that are against our own interests. Calling ourselves niggers and bitches and glamorizing pimp and talking about shooting ourselves and killing each other, that's directly against our interests. But we're doing those behaviors. We function in ways that are against our own behavior. The criminalization of our own group, it gives validation to the white society's mistreatment of us, and through their prison system highly incarcerating us, cops killing us, we are contributing to our own demise because we've been socially engineered to do so. These are the reality we have to understand. We must stop normalizing what has been done to our minds. The white society attacks our unity and then steers our culture. And when you erode people's unity and self-love, they can then be ruled over forever. When you condition people to perceive themselves as derogatory caricatures, they can also be ruled over forever. Brothers and sisters, it's time for us to elevate our minds and recognize the truth of our plight and condition. Because before you can do anything to address something, you must get at the core truth. The core truth is we're being socially engineered, we've been socialized. And we've been programmed to think the attacks on our minds is in the past tense. That's what the Willie Lynch does, past tense, or doing the colonization of black people. But the reality is the white society never stopped colonizing the minds of black people. The colonizing process is now called socialized and is being reinforced unrelentingly daily. There are people who works in the government who does this. Every government has two faces. There is the public persona that professes equality for all. And then there's what's called a shadow government that works in the background. And they do things that the public never learns about. Although white governments profess equality, they are unrelentingly committed to the preservation of the nation's white dominance and control. And there's also an immense fear of massive unified black retribution. This necessitates that the white society behind the scenes, the shadow government, deploys tactics against the black population. Even when they tell us that our population is 13.5%, that's not true. The part of their psychological warfare and their war against us is to always marginalize our numbers in our minds. They're going to always tell us. You know, on one hand, they said, we know we're making, they said we're out producing babies 3 times the rate more than they do, but yet our population doesn't seem to be growing. You ever notice that? On one hand, they're saying we're screwing like bunnies, have a bunch of babies, but our population, they keep it small. For 25 years, they kept telling us that we were just 12% of the population, 12% of the population. Then they gave us 13.5. 1 minute they said we're 50 million. Now they bring that number down. Their goal is they use psychological warfare on us. And the reason why we're so gullible is because we're not functioning based upon an accurate interpretation of the true relationship that exists between black people and white people. White society wants to maintain their dominance, and they want to continue, and they do so by attacking black people with these nefarious tactics that goes on behind the scenes. We are seeing the symptoms of these in our communities. Some of us are pondering, scratching our heads. Why? What's happening to our people? It is a deliberate attack on our people by the white societies through propagandists and social scientists. One love and peace, brothers and sisters.